Welcome to the Product Breakfast Club. Today is a super intense, very special episode. We have our first interview guest accidentally. We did not even know we were going to do interviews on this podcast. This is supposed to just be us rambling, but we have Jason Fried is going to be on the show today.
Oh, just
we
Jason
are kind
Fried.
of freaking out.
It's only Jason Fried.
Who is Jason? What's that?
It's only
Jason
Jason Fried.
It's just Jason Fried. Just super famous, super successful CEO extraordinaire, designer extraordinaire, basically person who's been my idol since I first started reading his stuff, 2006. Inspired all kinds of the thinking that's in the design sprint. This is the first time I will have spoken to him. I'm freaking out. I'm kind of freaking out right now.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm actually a little bit nervous about it, to be honest. It was actually the most, I read Rework, which I'm holding up here for the YouTube people. This is my original copy from 2011. I bought it the week we started Aj&Smart. And honestly, I read it again this morning and I realized I have no original ideas. Everything about Aj&Smart is from this book. Every piece of product advice I give people, it's still based on the principles from Rework. Jason Fried has been a huge influence on me. It's actually insane. It's insane.
I had the same thing happen. So I brought out Getting Real. So this is the 37 Signals book from 2006 that I read when I was working at Microsoft. And I was like, I reread it also last night. And I was like, oh my God, so much of the stuff that's in the design sprint, I just lifted from the way Jason was talking about building products. So this is kind of, I realized though, I tried to get into a little bit of a Zen mode about this interview. Yeah. And I realized that the part of me that was stressed wants to make a good impression on Jason. Like I basically, there's a part of me that's like, I hope Jason is impressed with me, but that really doesn't matter. So now that I'm aware of that, I realize it doesn't matter. Dude. It doesn't matter if,
I mean, that's the same for me. I guess you could probably phrase it like, you don't want to seem stupid in front of Jason Fried, right? That's the thing.
Well, that's right. You don't want to seem stupid. And I want to impress him. I want to be so smart that I impress him in some way, but that doesn't need to happen. That doesn't need to happen. And that's why in the interview today, we're going to try to take advantage of this. Not like we're trying to interview somebody and be impressive. We're going to try to just selfishly learn from Jason because the podcast has managed to give us the opportunity to talk to him.
Jason Fried, first guest on the Product Breakfast Club podcast. Yeah. We're only 9 episodes in and we already have the only the biggest person we wanted to talk to. I don't know. Should we just stop the show?
Careful what you wish for. Careful what you wish for, I think, is what happens when we tweeted at him and he said he'd do it. All right. Well, we'll see. All right.
All right. Let's do the call. Jason, thanks a lot for joining us on the old Product Breakfast Club.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
And I thought that just to get things kicked off and just to get straight to the point, we've already introduced you before you came on, so we're not going to get into the whole who's Jason Fried thing. I think a lot of people already know as well. We thought we'd just dive straight into it. Everybody knows. It's just like...
For better or worse.
We thought we'd just dive straight into the tweet that we started talking about a couple of episodes back and accidentally became the point of the entire episode. And let me just read it out for anybody listening to this for the first time, which I'm sure there'll be a lot of people. And then let's just dive into it. So it's a long tweet. I think you took advantage of all the characters imaginable. So you can only iterate on something after it's been released. Prior to release, you're just making the thing. Even if you change it, you're just making it. Iterating is when you change or improve after it's out. So if you want to iterate, ship. So this is the tweet that you pumped out. I think it was just a little bit before Christmas. And it caught my attention just before we started recording the podcast because a lot of people were freaking out about it, which was obviously really, it was really fun to watch. And what I'd love to do just to kick this off is to get from your perspective what exactly you meant by that, because there seems to have been so many misinterpretations.
Okay. So basically, my point, and I know this is all semantics at the end of the day. We're just talking about language and when you start getting into the definition of iterate versus revise, whatever, right? Fundamentally, what I'm basically trying to say is that until my point of view, my feeling at least, is that until something is out on the market, okay, until it's actually being used for real by real customers, not being tested, like it's out, okay, that's when you get real feedback that's really valuable. And after that is when you begin to iterate on actual feedback. That to me is the feedback that really matters, which is ultimately the customer feedback from the market. Before that, you're revising, you're tweaking, you're still guessing. It's all a guess. Everything's still a guess until it's actually hit the market. And then it's still sort of a guess. But at least at that point, you're able to make what I consider, you're able to iterate on something that exists. Prior to that, everything's still a dream, in my opinion. It's still something you're making. It's still something you're trying. It's still something you're tweaking and revising. And there would be a million of revisions and whatnot. But I feel like there needs to be a threshold when you get to say that you're iterating. And that is once something is shipped, launched, live, being used by real customers out in the field for real, then you can iterate on the product. So that's what I was trying to get at. And again, I recognize that it's all semantics and it's all language and whatever. But I do think there's this point where, like, if you want to iterate, you got to ship. And I feel like you need to sort of earn the ability to iterate, and that is by putting something on the market for real. Right. That's what I was trying to get at.
Right. And you said, I mean, you kind of boiled it down to that testing gives you simulated answers, shipping gives you real answers. Why is it that you thought you actually needed to post this tweet? Do you think a lot of companies are like holding things back? What is the reason behind it? Because I think that's what's maybe interesting.
Actually, it was something that we did internally. We'd shipped something. We've been using something internally for a while, and we all felt great about it. And we had some people look at it, and everything was great. And then we shipped it, and then like shitstorm came at us of feedback, and it reminded me yet again that the only real feedback that I believe that you can truly trust is when you actually put something out there. So it's actually something that we did. And we kind of went against our own best, like our best intentions was like, let's get this right internally. Let's make sure let's use it for a long period of time internally. Let's make sure it's right. You put it out there and all of a sudden like reality hits. And to me, it's the same thing as if you ask people how much they're willing to pay for something. Like right. You cannot, in my opinion, you cannot ask people how much they're willing to pay for something, because until they have to pay for it, the answer doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. I'm willing to pay 100. Well, if you don't have to pay 100, you might as well say 1,000 or 50. It doesn't matter until you actually have to pay. So I believe like the same thing is true for products. Like you can't really ask people, does this make sense? Is this easy to use? How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? Because they're not actually, they don't have to lay down their usage, just like they don't have to lay down their money. And so that's kind of, it was basically sparked by our own ineptitude internally. And we occasionally fall into these pitfalls where we think we got it figured out, and then you put out in the wild and you don't have it figured out. We made some changes over a course of 2 days to fix that, but it wasn't externally motivated; it was internally motivated.
Okay, but you hit.
Well, it's kind of frustrating listening to you talk because I wanted to disagree more. I thought that would make for a more interesting conversation, but I think everything you're saying makes a ton of sense, and it kind of matches up with the way when Jonathan and I are talking about doing process, always what we're always talking about. Maybe I wonder if the thing that seemed to really incite a lot of people on Twitter and sort of sparked us to start talking about it too is what role, if any, testing with customers should have before you launch. Like, can you learn anything? Do you all at Basecamp ever learn anything useful, or can you think for other organizations it ever makes sense to test before they launch? Given the semantic differences aside, is there a value? What is it?
Yeah. So here's how we've always looked at it. And again, let me just say up front, like, this is just how we look at it, right? I'm not suggesting any of these things are right or wrong necessarily. This is just like what we've done. We have a small company. We have 5 or 6 designers, depending on how you count. We try to get things done in 6-week cycles at the very most. So like from idea to shipping anything, 6 weeks, not a whole product redesign or anything like that, but like features, whatever, right? And what I always think about is value and odds. So we could put what we're building in front of a bunch of people and test it along the way. I think that would slow us down It might get us to a better answer. It might not, but it would certainly slow us down. And then I kind of figure out the probability. Like, are we going to discover something that much better than, what we think we can come up with? And is it worth the cost of slowing the thing down, getting people involved, coordinating schedules to get someone to test something, getting their feedback? Now we have 3 different types of feedback, whether it's diametrically opposed feedback. Like, now who do we listen to? Now what do we do? And my feeling is that I think that we are best off, all things considered, doing the best work that we think we're capable of doing. We've been doing this for a while. Doesn't mean we don't make mistakes, but we feel like we've learned a lot of things over 18 years. And like, let's take our best shot at it. Let's get it out in the wild. And then if we made some mistakes, we can correct them very quickly. And we'll know the real mistakes because we'll have thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people using it immediately, and not just a small collection. So it's just been our experience that is the best trade-off for us. Everything's a series of trade-offs. All design, product, it's all trade-offs. And for us, we prefer just to stay tight, lean, stay focused on what we're doing, make our best choices along the way, use our best judgment along the way, put something out there. And 95% of the time, we don't run into any problems. 5% of the time, we run into big problems that you could say could have been prevented had we had it thoroughly tested ahead of time. But had we been thoroughly testing 100% of everything ahead of time, we would have been wasting that testing 95% of the time and slowing all of our process down. So that's sort of the calculation that we make. I think it probably depends overall on perhaps like what you're doing, how well you know the domain. So we're building Basecamp for us primarily initially because we use Basecamp every day. We understand Basecamp really well. If I was making medical testing software and I wouldn't be using that day to day, I would have a harder time judging whether or not something is solving the proper problems in the right way. I wouldn't really understand what trade-offs are worth making. I wouldn't understand a lot of that stuff. So I think it really does totally depend on the context of what you're building, your experience with it and with the domain, and maybe also how much experience you have in the past that you can draw on to try and make the best possible decisions. Not that they're going to be the right decisions every time, but that they're as close to the right decisions as possible. And then roll the dice. And I'm willing to take the 5 or 10% chance that like we might be wrong on something and then fix it quickly out in the open, then make sure everything is buttoned up. Actually, here's the thing. You can't make sure everything's buttoned up. You can hope everything's buttoned up through testing it, but then you still put it out in the wild and certain things can go wrong. So anyway, that's my general take on it.
Great. We're just like, who's going to say something?
This is,
Go ahead,
Jason,
Jake.
to give you a little bit of background actually about like who we are and what the heck this thing is.
Who are these two guys?
I know these guys. I know you guys.
So I'm Jake, and I've been following your stuff forever. I read Getting Real. I worked at Microsoft when I read Getting Real, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And it totally made me question the way we were doing products there. And then I very shortly afterwards left and went to go work at Google. And that lens of like the way we're building things is not maybe rational. I couldn't unsee your view on building products. And so that over the years led me to create, I think, this design sprint thing is this thing I eventually came up with as a way at Google to try to do some of this stuff. And so that's what I've been doing for a number of years. And Jonathan is the CEO of a design agency based in Berlin. They use design sprints. He's in that similar situation to I think kind of where you were probably early in your career, where 37 Signals was growing. You're thinking about what kinds of products to build, and so we're huge fans of yours. And we kind of accidentally like poked to the bear with tweeting at you about that tweet and talking about it on our fledgling podcast. But we've been doing this. We don't even really know what we're doing with this podcast. It's sort of me and Jonathan recording conversations with each other, and then we thought we can't pass up the opportunity to interview Jason Fried, but we're a little freaked out. But that's all really super cool. And I kind of think actually the way you describe what you can get out of research and what kinds of teams need to do it and don't need to do it, it all perfectly it fits with the way we think about it. So I think the big thing that I was wondering about coming into this conversation and reading your tweet is that at the end of every week, so the design sprint's this really structured process, and the last day you get the team to test it with customers. And I think most of the steps in the sprint, if you looked at it, you'd probably think, okay, I would hope you would think that's kind of applying the same mentality, like the getting real or the like rework mentality to building products. It's the kind of things most teams need to do. Like they need to get together. They need to stop being abstract. They need to get concrete with their ideas. They need to put them in front of people as quickly as they can. But the big difference is we're saying, put them in front of your customers and do like one-on-one interviews on Friday, because any team can do that in a week. Not any team can quickly make this like organizational transformation to be able to launch so fast.
Sure.
And so it's super interesting. Your take on like, do you disagree with that take? If you could redesign what we do, what would you tell us to do differently?
I don't know. I've read the book. I'm familiar with what you. I'm familiar with the structure. Like I'm familiar with all that. And I don't think it's a bad idea what you're suggesting at all. I guess I think what's important is to recognize that after 5 days or 4 days of work or whatever, and you put something in front of customers, like what kind of feedback are they actually giving you? And that like, well, here's the thing I always struggle with like customer feedback prior to something that's actually truly real and shipped, which is that there's a lot of it depends on the questions you ask, first of all. It also depends on the context they're in. So I don't think products can be judged in isolation. And this is why I'm so much a fan of putting something out there in the real world and letting people use it for real versus testing environments. Because when someone's using something in the real world, there's all sorts of other variables that you cannot simulate. So like someone had a bad morning. Their boss is screaming over their shoulder to get something done by 2:00. They've got a meeting coming up in 15 minutes. There's some other pressures, other things they have to do. And all these things push on them in different ways and create different forces that help them evaluate whether or not something's good or bad in that moment. So like if someone's being patiently asked to figure something out, in a more of a traditional testing setting, they don't have those other pressures. Meanwhile, someone who's like already frustrated, it actually needs to be a lot simpler for them to figure things out in that situation. And so I just find it like it's important to take their feedback with a grain of salt, just like you're offering them something with a grain of salt, which is this is not the final thing, and their feedback is not the final thing either. So I think it's a matter of recognizing that. I also think the other thing I would suggest is that it's a matter of making sure that you don't design by anecdote, which is you hear someone say something or two people say something and you think that is the thing. Like now this one person said that one thing and like, oh, well, now we got to change everything. It's like, well, that's one person. That's one thing in a simulated situation. So it's a matter of figuring out to which degree of value do you place upon that feedback, given the fact that the inputs are not final either, and not taking those answers as gospel, essentially. Like you have to filter it back through your own judgment and your own ideas and that sort of thing. So anyway, that's my, I'm guessing you guys may not disagree with that either, but that's kind of my general feeling. And that's my concern about feedback in short time horizons. For example, I know a lot of people, a lot of companies like show customers wireframes, and like to me that is just a bad idea. Because
totally
wireframe just there's and I know you guys do, but like this is pretty common still. I see it all the time. I hear from people all the time. It's like the customers don't know what to do with that. You can't look at, because then what they're doing is they're looking at something. They're not using something. And if you're looking at something and judging it, that's a very different thing than using something and judging it. And it's also a much different thing from using it for real and judging it. So anyway, that's kind of my feedback there.
So do you think, so one thing I think is interesting about this is what is realistic for a team or an individual to do when you try to share an idea about a product process with them. And I think one thing that I really tried to do when working on the design sprint process was make it something that any team could kind of pick up and do and have some good results. And I think part of the goodness, part of what I hope insulates people from those anecdotal decisions that can be really harmful, or from overinterpreting an artificial situation, is that the whole team is together watching the feedback. And in my experience, those kinds of tests in a design sprint feel much different than the typical kinds of usability tests, or especially wireframe tests that I think teams often do, which I've also seen a lot of. There's just something different about the team is in a frame of mind of what questions can we try to answer pre-launch, like right now, before we commit and go, hopefully really fast to launching. But I do wonder with, like, do you think about when you're writing, when you're tweeting? One thing that I think is so cool about your writing is that it's so opinionated, and I know you do that intentionally, and I know that you poke people intentionally. I mean, the Getting Real intro talks a little bit about like the why with that voice, and do you ever think about, like, when you're writing a tweet, not necessarily this one, anyone, right, or writing a post, do you kind of think like what you're trying to accomplish for your audience? Because I know to some degree it's stuff that's coming up real world for you, but how do you think through that stuff? What goes on?
Yeah, first off, I agree that I think it's hard. I think it'd be hard to say that there's people won't come out better in the end if they have customers look at things early, or like, at the end of a process. Like, I don't think there's anything bad about having additional eyes on something. So, like, I think in most cases it's probably a good idea at some point there. It's just I think it's about timing and sequencing and whatnot. But anyway, basically what I'm gathering is, like, do I think of the consequences perhaps of when I say something?
Oh, well, not the consequences so much. I mean, we could to be more like, the more combative interpretation of my question is, do you think about the consequences? But the other one is like, I'm kind of curious, and I want to get into a little bit asking you about how you write, just because as someone who's admired your writing, I'm just curious. And part of it is, how much of it is intentionally crafted to, like, I think people wait too long to ship and over iterate, and this is the shorter and more opinionated the missive, the more likely they're going to break their frame of mind and have to reconsider.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like when I put something on Twitter, there's less room than there's anywhere else to explain something. So, like, you have to leave a lot of detail out, and then of course you open it up to interpretation, and then people take it in their own ways. But I mean, I've always just written things down that I want to say. I don't think so much about the audience, actually. This is what's on my mind, and I'm going to share it. And most of it comes actually from things that are going on internally at Basecamp at our own company, observations that we have, or things that we notice. Like this whole string of tweets started because we screwed something up, basically. Yeah. And it reminded me that, like, hey, you don't know until you ship it, and then you know. So anyway, I recognize that people, you can't really control when people are going to receive information, like what part of their career they're in, or how much experience they have, or how willing they are to push back, or how willing they are to accept. There's so many people out there, and we have a large audience, so there's no way to really know. So I don't even know if I can write to an audience, because we have many of them. So I just write what's on my mind. And I hope that for the most part, people are reasonable, and they recognize that, like, everything depends, and context colors everything, and there's only so many disclaimers you can put into an article before you sound apologetic and it's like super washed out. Like, well, I didn't mean this and I didn't mean that. Like, so you just got to go out there and say what you think, and let people, go at it if need be. But hopefully, like, I hope in most cases, of course, there's always cases where this doesn't apply, but that the nugget is clear enough that people see, oh, I think I understand what he's trying to say here. And that most people will understand at least where I'm coming from. They may disagree with it, and that's totally fine. But I want people to understand where I'm coming from. It's not calculated to get a response. We don't write. Yeah. I don't write provocatively to get a response. I write provocatively because, like, I have a point of view, and I actually think that's one of the things that's missing from a lot of companies and teams is a point of view. I think that what I've noticed, especially as of the last couple of years, people aren't thinking enough about how they're working. They're adopting a methodology that they read or that they picked up from someone else, and that's just the way they will work until they pick up the next methodology. Versus them like looking at themselves and their team and go, what works best for us? Doesn't necessarily because this other team uses it. That doesn't mean it's good for us. Like I want people to be more self-critical about their own teams and their own makeup of their own teams and their own, what works best for them. And I just feel like I'd love to see more of that self-reflection out there. And you see it in tools too. You see it like in for a long time, if people would pick up Rails and act like they're, like us, like the Rails people. And then there's Node and there's React. There's all these different things that people pick up, and there's Python and whatnot. And people tend to like go into these camps and just like defend the camp versus figuring out, it's like they're under attack, but no one's actually under attack. Like you don't have to defend. You can just kind of figure out what works best for you. But by the way, I think design sprints as a concept is a wonderful concept, and I think it can help most teams, absolutely, especially teams that don't have any current methodology or teams that take way too long to get anything going. And that to me is the biggest problem I see out there is things just take too long for too many teams because they don't know where to go with it. So I love the 5 days. I love the tight thing. I love like let's get some progress. Let's get some traction here. Let's do something and have an end. One other thing I'll say, I'm rambling a bit here. I know that, but
no problem.
One of the
podcast.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we work in like 6-week cycles is so we can always see the end.
Yeah.
And 5 days, you can always see the end. 2 weeks, you can always see the end. It's when you work on projects that takes 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, 18 months, you can't see the end. That is demoralizing. It's very hard to work on something when you don't know when it's going to end, I think, especially if it's an unhappy project. And there are many of those where it's just like, you're not really totally into it. If you're not totally into it and you know it's going to end in 3 weeks anyway, like you just you'll be fine. Yeah. If you're not totally into it and you don't know when it's going to end, that's demoralizing. So I love things that have horizons that you can basically see the end of. Because if it's great, you can do it again quickly. And if it's bad, you can end it soon. That's to me, that fits in really well with what you guys preach.
Great. I have a short question really quickly just before Jake blasts in another one. Actually, it's a little bit back to the topic that we were talking about, the simulated results, and I'm actually just going to ask you like directly for advice because this podcast is super selfish for myself and Jake, and it's not, we're not thinking of the audience either, so let's just like ask you specific questions. So a lot of my clients, a lot of our customers are large corporates, like Fortune 500s, these type of very large organizations who aren't necessarily used to creating digital products in-house, right? And a lot of these companies, they want to start doing that, and their go-to methodology is design thinking. It's or building innovation labs or things like this, right? Okay. And usually when we get called in, usually when they call in us, it's because those things have been going on for 2 years and no innovation has happened and no products have come out. And they have like they've been trained and they've spent a lot of money to believe that you need to do things like a 6-month research process before you start anything. How would someone like me being called into these companies, like let's say you're in my position, what would be a way for you to go into one of these companies and help them at least understand a little bit how to move quicker? Or do you think it's just like impossible to change a company of that size?
Well, I think it's definitely hard to change a company that size. But I think the first thing I would say is, hey, is what you're doing working? Like, why are you calling me in? If what you're doing is working, you don't need me here. I have an alternative point of view on this. Like, I want to, let's try something in a week. This is what, let's try something. What can we build in a week? Can we build something here? Can we make something here? Can we do something in a week? And if they say that's impossible, then like you show them that it's possible. Maybe you just, you just have to show them that it's people just have to see what's possible. And I think that in a lot of organizations that are especially much larger organizations and more traditional organizations, they haven't seen that be possible. Like, for example, next week on Tuesday, we're launching like a large visual refresh of Basecamp 3. Yeah. And we did this in 7 weeks with one designer.
Nice.
Now, it's a big product, huge product, millions of people using it, like big time thing. One person did it in 7 weeks. Now, that's not a bragging point. All I'm saying is that like it's actually possible to do that.
Yeah,
it's possible to do that. And in a lot of organizations, I've been reading a lot of posts on Medium about like refreshes, and it's like an 8-month process, and there's 42 people involved, and there's all these steps and all the stuff. And you read enough of those things, and you think, like, well, this is how you do it, right? You put a bunch of Post-it notes on the wall, and you have 20 meetings over an 8-month period, and you do tons of research, and you interview tons of people, and you have 7 different specialties involved, and like, yeah, that is one way to do it. There's also other ways to do it, and until people can see that, they don't know it's possible. So I would go into an organization like that and say, let's not even work on this problem that you hired me to work on, because there's already too much baggage there in a sense. Let's work on something else. What else do you have going on here that you want to improve? What can we do in a week to show some level of progress? So I would start on a parallel thing, because I think there's probably, by the time they've called you in to rescue them, there's probably so much baggage and so many personalities tied to it, and so much politics tied to it, and a lot of pride. I think it's hard to push that hill. But I think if you take a step over to the right, you just like slide over and you go, hey, let's pick something else. Let's try something else. What else is bugging you around here? What other screen or what other process is like a mess? Like, let's just pick that one. So there's no politics. I mean, there's probably still some politics, but it's not like fresh politics. It's just like maybe old politics. Like, let's pick that. And that's what I would do. And then I would demonstrate that it's possible, and then go, okay, now see what's possible. Like now let's step back to where we were on the thing that you hired me for. And now let's see if we can apply some of that same approach to that. I think then you have like a win under your belt and some evidence that this is possible. And it's hard to, I think, ignore that at some point.
Yeah. And I think that
said, none of this is easy. Like, this is why I got out of consulting a long time ago, because it's very hard to change organizations, extremely hard to change organizations. So anyway.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that, like, you mentioned that earlier, people, they don't really think about the ways that they're working. And Jake, you talk about defaults, like bad defaults. And I think there's one very bad default that I see even in startups and in smaller design agencies that I work with, is that people think that the difficult way is the right way, and that the only way to really get things done is to do it the hard way. They're looking for all of this friction when there really doesn't need to be necessarily friction. And that's one of the crazy things. Like, I guess that refers to what you just said, Jason. When we come in to a company and run a sprint, or when myself and Jake do a sprint workshop, people are just like, wait a second, this usually takes us, like 6 months, 8 months. Like, what shouldn't we create like a product vision document first before we do something like this? And it's like, where do all these really difficult, stupid things come from? And you realize, people in the company, they don't even know where these processes came from. They just adopt them when they join. And it really is something like they just take on these bad defaults and don't think about it. So it's really it's a process that really just doesn't improve on its own. It needs like a shock from the outside, from the market sometimes, where it's like these companies are just panicking and need to change, rather than it doesn't really happen on its own within the companies when they're comfortably plodding along.
Well, there's something that you said earlier, Jason, that really struck me about the not thinking about the audience, when you write that it's just, this is what's honest. And there's a benefit to shipping fast and to moving fast, which is that you learn in the real market, which is the only actual market. And then I think this other part of it is that you, by moving fast, maybe more likely to stay true to your opinionated vision of something. The longer you take and the more you debate it inside and the more you try to react to feedback, real or imagined, the more you're often going to water it down. And I wonder if that's a big part of what I think is so successful and so powerful about, certainly not Basecamp, but about your writing and about the sort of the vision for developing products that you've shared. It's really hard to do. It's hard to be authentic. I always find myself every time I write something struggling to not water it down or think about the audience. And you make that seem quite effortless, but I feel like it's all tied together. Like, if companies can be more authentic, if they can be more true to what they want to do and more opinionated, that a lot of things just come together and work better. How do you do that? Like, how does that work?
Well, maybe it's a defect of mine. I don't know. It's possible that it is, but I mean, the thing is, like, I disagree with myself all the time, and so I'll write something up perhaps, and like, I mean, I can see another angle on anything that I write up, and I could disagree with myself immediately, and sometimes I do. And I think you actually hit on something great, which is one of the things I've noticed about long running projects is that, and this is something why we avoid long running projects, is you begin to second guess yourself. There's a cycle where you begin to second guess yourself because you've been sitting in front of it for so long that now you have a new idea. Yeah. And that's actually something I think you need to be very careful about that. Like you're a designer, you make things, you're a creator. And so like you sit in front of something for 6 months, it's old to you again. It'd be brand new to customers who haven't seen it yet, but to you, it's already old. And then you start second guessing every decision. And then if you start second guessing 10% of them and you start making changes to 10% of them, now you have inconsistency. And now that you have inconsistency, you got to figure that out and get consistent again. So you either have to go backwards, or you have to go forward all the way with a new idea. And that 6-month project turns into a 9-month, 10-month project. And then maybe you start second guessing yourself again. You go, yeah, you know what? Maybe the first thing we did was better. And then like, I love squeezing all of that indecision out and like going with something. And like, for example, our design process, we don't look at multiple directions whenever we do anything. We pick one and we go. And then we iterate. We don't iterate until we ship, but we revise and tweak. We revise and play off that. We riff off of that central idea that we have, and we evolve that. So we don't look at 3 or 4 or 5 things and pick one. We just build one, and then we iterate. You know, once it's out, we might come up with a better idea, but we just pick the one we like best and evolve it, and then get it out to the market. We commit early. We just commit early to things. And we make them the best they possibly can be, in our opinion. And then if we want to change them, we change them. For example, this redesign that's launching Tuesday for Basecamp 3. Basecamp 3 launched about 2 years ago. I've been using the new redesign for about 3 weeks, and I can't stand looking at production currently, the current design, because it looks like it's 10 years old to me now. So I'm so excited to get the new design out next week. But had we held up the new design and like, you know, I'd be bored of that, I'm sure, soon enough. Yeah. So we've always tried to squeeze out opportunity for things to slow down. And, you know, look, here we go. I'll disagree with myself. Like, I can make the case that maybe second guessing something is a good move, because then you put it through its paces again. And are you really certain? Is the honeymoon phase over? Like, all that stuff. I can make all those arguments. But like, again, it comes down to trade-offs and odds. And I'm not willing to constantly provide space to second guess. We can second guess in 6 months after the thing's been out for 6 months. I'd much rather that be the case than to hold everything back and try and pursue this perfect moment when you have no more second guesses and everything is perfect in the whole thing. Like, I just don't think that's how things work. So, and as far as writing and not thinking about the audience, you know, I try to write all my blog posts within 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Like, that's it. So I write and I do a little bit of editing and I publish. And that's it. I think if you work on it over a matter of days, you're going to rewrite it 3 or 4 times. And, you know, is it going to be 3% better? Maybe. Is it worth 3% better waiting 4 or 5 days and then maybe not even publishing it because you get cold feet or something? Like, you know, those are all things that happen. And I just try to avoid them by getting stuff out fast and then not having to face those internal demons of, is this actually any good? Yeah. Some stuff I publish, I regret, because it's not regret. That's the wrong. I don't regret any of it. It's more like, that wasn't that good. I probably shouldn't have put that out, but I did. And it doesn't matter because everyone forgets about it in 3 days anyway. So like, you know, who cares? Yeah, except for you. But anyway, that's just how I look at it. I try not to attach this preciousness to these things. And instead I put them out there and they are what they are and they stand up for themselves or they fall down on their own. And like, what are you going to do?
Man, that's admirable. That's super cool. I'm reminded of, so I'm trying to kind of create a new career for myself writing. I'm trying to write like fiction, which is just I have no business trying to do that. But one of the things that really inspires me a lot is this book on writing by Stephen King. I don't know if you've read that, but
I've heard of that book. I have not read it, though.
Highly recommend it to everyone. Like, you don't have to be a Stephen King fan. I was not before reading it, but what's really the most cool thing about it, I mean, he has some great writing advice, but the most cool thing is how passionate he is about what he does. And he just, he writes like 2 800-page books a year.
Yeah, amazing.
He does the Stephen King version of the horror novel version of what you're talking about, which is he just cranks them out and then he just publishes them. He does like one revision and that's it. There's no long editing process. He's like, yeah, some of them not that great. Maybe I'm not so happy with that. Whatever. Like, I just enjoy doing it. I'm just going to keep going. And I feel like that unpreciousness, that willingness to like just go and just make the thing and just let this like perfectly crafted version of yourself not exist and just let go of it and just go is so admirable. And it's so hard to do, but hearing you talk about it, and it's like, that's inspiring. It makes me want to be less precious.
You're doing it right now. We're recording a podcast, right? This is one take. We're having a conversation.
Yeah.
I may listen back to it and go, I didn't make a really good point there. You may listen back to it and go, I didn't make the point I wanted to make. Like, but whatever. We're recording this thing live. I don't know if you'll edit this at all. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. It doesn't even matter. Like, yeah. So we're just publishing it, and there you are. We just did it. So we just did it. Yeah. The only difference is that we're talking versus, the talking going through your fingers into a keyboard. I don't see them as different, but I think a lot of writers do see them as different, and they feel like if it's written down, it has to be perfect. And I like to make things that are readable and grammatically correct and all that stuff. So I go through.
You heard that, Jonathan? Because you do need to make your writing correct. Jonathan and I disagree about how much you should edit.
I really disagree.
Okay.
I agree more with Jason on this one for sure.
Well, I want to make sure that things are spelled properly, and that I love the rhythm of language, and so I want to make sure, like, if I can find the right word that has a couple good bounces into the next word, like, I'll play with that stuff a bit. But to me, that's play. That is, like, I like to play with that. That's not critical. Those aren't critical things. That's more for me. That's selfish. I just like the way it sounds. I want to make sure it sounds great, but it doesn't really matter. You could argue, yeah, it does matter, and like whatever. You can go down all these roads, but like, we're having a conversation. If we were having coffee right now, we'd be having a conversation. Conversations, you don't redo them. You just have them. And I think that's how I like to write. I just have a conversation with the keyboard and I send it out there and I can't take it back.
Yep.
And I think once you think about that a little bit more, it's a little bit different. I think maybe perhaps books, like we're writing another book right now, and like we do a little bit more editing with the book. I think for some reason there's an expectation that, that we also have to work with the publisher. They have their own reputation. Like, there's different levels here. When we wrote Getting Real, like, that we self-published that to a PDF, and like, boom, there it goes. Publisher is different. So like, there's different players and parties involved. So I think there's a different level of criticality and different, you're not just working for yourself there. But I would begin to think of writing as just having a conversation with somebody you can't see, and you don't get to take it back.
So I know, to build on that topic for a second, from everything that we have read about your writings, you seem to be very effective with how you use your time. You think a lot about, should I be in meetings? That's my impression, is that you're very conscious of how you spend your time and making good use of it. You're on Twitter a lot. Like, I'm impressed with how you will engage with people on Twitter. I mean, I don't know if you're on there all the time, but people will tweet at you and you're kind of famous, and you'll like write back to them and have a conversation with them, which is cool. Or like, we tweeted at you and you were like, well, be on. Okay, well, to us, you're very
fine, whatever. Yeah.
So how do you? How do you decide, or what role for you does writing, does tweeting, does that stuff play? How does it fit into what you're trying to do with your time in general?
It's spontaneous. I mean, I don't I pop on and pop off here and there. Sometimes I'll kind of go on a roll if there's something I'm saying that people are engaging with. Yeah. I tend not to reply to people who have an agenda, like who are trying to just get into an argument, because we could argue it all day long, but Twitter is absolutely the wrong place to argue anything. Yeah. So for me, it's more like people who have questions and want clarification or something like that. I'll tend to follow up with them if I can, if I have something that I feel like I can add. But I don't really want to get into battles on Twitter. It's just the wrong place to argue. I'm happy to argue. Like, I'd love to see more arguments on stage. I think that our industry underrepresents the debate. Like, there are there are hardly any disagreements on stage if you go to any of these conferences. Everyone's agreeing. If you, especially on panels, it's like everyone's like, yeah, and yeah, and yeah, and yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, there you go. So I'm happy to debate all these things on their merits and disagree openly and everything. But Twitter is just the wrong place because people already have the response written before you even responded. They already have. They're trying to make their points because you only have a little bit of room. So I get it.
Yeah.
Like if you only had 7 seconds to talk, you don't have time to respond to someone else and say something. So you just say something and you kind of ignore what they even said. So anyway, I like to be helpful on Twitter, which is like, you know, if someone wants clarification or they want a resource or they want to link to something like, or, you know, sometimes if I actually know someone who disagrees with me, like I might go into it a few tweets with them because I know where their heart is on it. And they're, you know, I respect them and so I know them and I respect them and I feel like we can argue a little bit versus it going like way off track. But I don't set aside time for that. I just, you know, when I feel it, I pop over there. To me, like Twitter and Instagram are modern day smoke breaks, basically. Like way back in the day when people smoked a lot of cigarettes, companies would let people go outside for 15 minutes and smoke a cigarette. And like, no one thought that was a bad thing. Like, I actually feel like people were healthier smoking cigarettes because they got to take a break. This is, of course, like not technically true for lung health,
We'll quote you
but
on
like
this.
they got to take a break from work. They got to just usually they would stay outside and talk to other people, other smokers, I guess. And to me, like that's what Twitter and Instagram are for me now. I'll jump on there for a little bit, you know, poke around, and then get back to work. They're little relief moments, but I don't have a Twitter window open all day. I use a 12-inch MacBook, and everything I do is full screen. So I never have multiple things up at once. I'm just a full screen guy, focused guy on one thing at a time, and that's just how I manage to do it.
Well, very disappointing, Jason. We keep looking for some master plan besides your persona and your brand, and it's just authenticity. It all comes back to authenticity.
Well, I don't know. I don't think too much about that stuff. I just kind of do what makes sense to me and what feels right, and I don't think too much about it, actually. I mean, I have, like, we think about the product. I think a lot about, I'm very intentional about how we run our company and that kind of stuff. But when it comes to me just sharing ideas and thoughts out there, I just share ideas and thoughts. I don't think too much about that because to me, those are personal things and they don't impact other people in the same way as, like, if I make a policy decision at the company, it might affect 56 people. And like, I care deeply about that. Yeah. So I'm careful about those kinds of things.
So Jason, really totally related to exactly what we're talking about right now. On Instagram, see, this is the segue that I'm going to use.
Yeah. Hey, really quick, just seconds. My AirPods have 10% battery life yet. If they drop out, will the mic just, I don't even know what happens, or should I just switch to this?
The mic will just turn on. And also, I mean, we don't want to keep you much longer anyway, because you're really after giving us a lot of your time.
Giving you a heads up. Just giving you a heads up on that. Happy to keep going.
On Instagram, you post a lot about really nicely crafted watches, beautiful cars. These are products that don't come out, the first go, like let's just get it out there and see what happens. Obviously, physical products like that, especially these watches, these are things that need a lot of time to be crafted and to be perfected. How do you reconcile your, let's say, digital product opinions with your, what seems to be a love for really well crafted, really well done physical products? Or does that even matter? It's just a curiosity.
Yeah. Oh, I think it comes down to the malleability of these things. So like software can change eternally, permanently, forever, easily. You ship a watch, like, no, can't. And in fact, even with software, way back when I first got started in software, I was using FileMaker Pro. I don't know if you guys even know FileMaker Pro, but right. So I was using FileMaker Pro to make software, and like this was actually before the internet. So I was uploading stuff to AOL, and basically you'd upload this thing. It was like an executable, like a standalone FileMaker Pro database, and like if I had to update that after I shipped it, like people have to download a new version, do a migration. Like it was a real pain in the ass. So back then, I was actually way more careful about what I was shipping because change was hard, and changing a car is incredibly hard, and changing, a watch, you basically, you can't do those things. So to me, it all comes down to how easy is it to change? What is the cost of change? And if the cost of change is really low, I feel like you can run faster and experiment more and be more willing to put stuff out there that may not totally be finished, because it's never finished anyway. Unlike a physical product is finished in a sense. But even that, like, you launch a physical product and new ideas come out. Like, there's, we're kind of inspired by car manufacturers. So Basecamp is all we do now. We're on version 3, 12 years in. And Porsche 911's been around for 50 years. There's been 6 different iterations of the 911. And it's still the same idea: engine in the back, small coupe, the whole thing. But every 5, 6, 7 years, Porsche has a new idea, new chassis, new engine, whatever. They also do mid-cycle refreshes. So there's like they change the bumper a little bit, change the interior a little bit, whatever. That's kind of what we're doing with Basecamp 3 right now. We're doing a visual refresh, but fundamentally it's the same product. And so I like this idea. So even if Porsche has a brand new idea, like they ship the car and like, this interior, we have a better idea. I guarantee they're working on that new idea already. And then 3 years down the road, they'll ship it. So they are changing. Just the pace is different. Our pace can be, we can make a change in an hour or 5 minutes or whatever we need to, if we need to. So, but I do appreciate the limitations of physical products and how there's a different level of criticality, and how you have to be more careful about certain things because you don't have a second chance with some of those.
Right. And a lot of people on Twitter, that's the first thing they jump on. They're like, all right, Jason, what about if I was making a plane, asshole?
Yeah. And I know exactly. And I always say, like, are you making a plane? And they all
well, it's an app that is kind of like, related to planes. Oh, did we're back.
So, I just, do we drop out?
We dropped out for a second, but it's okay.
Are we still there?
Yep.
You can hear me now? Okay. I think, people it's this gotcha culture. It's like,
yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha. What about a plane? It's like, yeah, what about a plane? What do you want from me? You're not making a plane. And like nobody really is making a plane except for like 1,000 people in the world. In the world, 1,000 people are making a plane. Now, what about?
Yeah, but what if, Jason?
If you're doing brain surgery? It's like
you posted it on Twitter, so.
Like, yeah, exactly. So anyway, those are the kinds of things I try to ignore.
Okay, last thing before I'm just gonna it just came up while you were talking about the physical products.
Sure.
So you're talking about like back to the tweet again, back to getting things out there, and then iterating when they're on the market. I think one of the reasons why companies are so precious about their products and so reluctant to get them out there is because they're taking bad examples from other companies that they don't understand. A lot of our customers, even like very new startups who, they read the right books, they do the right things, they take their inspiration from companies like Apple, who do hold things back for an entire year and do still release things all in one big bulk. And I think they almost think that that's how it's supposed to be because this whole Steve Jobs thing was such a big deal, and design is almost defined by Apple in the last 10 years. So for me, often the first thing I have to do the first few weeks when I go into a company is just try to tell them to pull back from this like obsession with these companies who are totally nailing it in a non-iterative way, and show them, case studies of companies who are actually able to do this very, very quickly, very successfully. I think it's a lot to do with just having bad role models or incorrect role models for the time that the company is in or the place that the company is in.
Yeah, I agree. One of the like unspoken rules, although we sometimes kind of mess up on this, is like, don't use Apple as an example. Don't use Amazon as an example. Don't use Google as an example. Like, these are extreme outliers. They just are extreme outliers. And they're great companies, obviously, but like, you're not them. You don't have the resources they have. You don't have the criticality they have. You don't have the scale they have. Apple kind of can't, in many ways, they can't screw up some things because they have, a billion people who
right.
might, so it's like, it's just different. Like, so yeah, I do think whenever but Steve Jobs would never, like, whatever,
yeah,
who cares?
Exactly.
So I do think it's important. I also, by the way, I think that's important when it comes to business advice as well. Like, I don't think you should be listening to Richard Branson tell you how to start a business. He hasn't started, like, he's at another level, and there's nothing wrong with Richard Branson. Like, Richard Branson's great at what he does, but like, that's not what you're doing if you're 3 people in a startup. Like you're not that.
Right.
And likewise, I'm the wrong person to talk to about starting a business. I haven't started a business in 18 years. I'm the right person maybe to talk to about keeping a business going and in the things that I do on a day-to-day basis. But you shouldn't be listening to me about how to start a business or about how to take venture capital money, because I've never taken it. I have my opinion about why and why you shouldn't and all those things. But like, if you're going to do it, don't ask me about what it's like, because I don't know anything about that. So I think it is important to match your mentors with your situation. In fact, I think it's far more valuable to talk to, if you're starting a business, it's more valuable to talk to someone who started one 6 months ago than to talk to anyone who's been successful at it but hasn't done it for 5 years or 10 years. Like, get to the ground, get to the real, get to the person who's closest to your situation. They have the most information about what it's really like at that time. So that's what I would look towards, and not like look at the idols, the extreme outlier idols.
Yeah.
By the way, Amazon's kind of interesting alternative example to Apple, which is Amazon kind of ships things pretty rapidly and kind of comes up with quirky, weird stuff, and a lot of it doesn't work, and they're like okay with it in a lot of ways. Or they're dedicated, like the first Kindle, like was, look back on it now, it's kind of a mess. Like in their head, they're probably like, we know it's a mess, but like, we're going to get out there and we're going to have a new version in 6 months, a new version in 6 months, a new version in 6 months. And we're going to get there eventually. 3 or 4 years down the road, we're going to get there eventually. So Amazon and Apple are actually complete opposites, I think, in that world. And I actually think that the Amazon model is a lot more realistic for more companies than the Apple model.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And by the way, Apple's been slipping a lot, which is interesting. Like, they've been slipping on hardware lately. The HomePod's late. They've maybe set up these expectations for themselves that are actually difficult for even themselves to meet now. And so if they can't be themselves, how are you going to be them?
That's deep. That's very deep. So, it feels like sorry, go ahead, Jake.
I was going to say, Jason, do you think that Basecamp is an outlier in a different way? Obviously, I mean, you guys aren't huge, but do you think that you're an outlier in a way, and that it's like, are there things that teams might find very difficult to reproduce about what you do?
Yeah, I think we are probably in some ways, for sure. Part of it is because we've been in business for 18 years, and that makes us an outlier, just period. The other part is that we've had a core that's been around for a long time. We've had a handful of people who've been here for 10 years now, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years. The average tenure at Basecamp is 5 years right now. And then in our industry, I think it's 18 months or something like that. So that actually affords us certain things that brand new teams cannot have, which is like a certain level of camaraderie, a certain level of comfort and pushing against each other, a certain level of honesty that you don't have with strangers, but you have with like good friends, in a sense, people you've been working with for a long time. So that's not impossible for other teams to have, but it's you just have to be dedicated enough to have that opportunity. So I think that those are some of the things that allow us perhaps to be able to do some of the things that we do, but those aren't impossible things. It's not that we have superheroes here. We do not. We don't hire famous designers. We don't hire famous programmers. We don't hire anyone who's famous. Like,
you guys are famous designers and programmers.
Yeah, that's
true.
Well, whatever that means. Like, we didn't. My point is that we're not like poaching from Airbnb and poaching from Apple, poaching from Google. We don't have anyone who's ever worked at Google or anyone who's worked at Apple in technical roles. Or like, we hire people who are just really, really good at their job and can become really great at their job. And they're often in places where they're not being appreciated, or they don't have the opportunity to shine or grow. And so none of us are superheroes in that way. We're not an all-star. We didn't pick an all-star team. We may have built an all-star team, but we didn't pick one. We didn't recruit one. So, I'm really inspired by I just forgot his name now. The coach of San Antonio Spurs,
Popovich,
right?
Who's
like
that?
They've had a few stars along the way, but they're just like, they've been good for 20 years.
Yeah.
And like that's what we're trying to do here, is kind of take any pieces that we can find And you have some long running pieces. You know, he had David Robinson for a while, then he had Tim Duncan, and, you know, he's got Kawhi Leonard now. Like, he's got these core people who are dedicated long-termers, but then can assemble anyone else into a great team. And so I don't think that we're outliers in terms of initial talent. I think we've become good at figuring out how to work well together. And we do have a unique way of working that we share with anyone who wants to know about it. So, like, it's not like we have secrets. But yeah, this is a long answer, and I've kind of come back around on it. But we're outliers because we've been around for a long time. We're outliers because we have people have been here for a long time. But I don't think that anything we do is hard. Is like, it's hard to get used to the way we're working, but it doesn't require. I don't believe it requires a certain level of superhuman talent or anything like that to do the things we do. It's just a matter of choices. Companies are a collection of choices and decisions, and figuring out which ones you want to make and how you want to make them, and that's what makes up the company. So all these are decisions that other people can make too. There's no crystal ball that there's no level of intelligence that we have that is so much high. I just don't buy that. In fact, far more intelligent people out there than us. Clearly, like, if you asked us to build like some, you know, AI, like, we couldn't even get started. Like, I don't know how to do any of that shit. We don't have like we have a couple really particularly good programmers on our team, but we don't have like deep computer science people. We may have one or two, but like, they're you know, it's none of that. It's just like figuring out what matters, figuring out what doesn't matter, which is even more important. Squeezing out all the stuff that would distract all of us from doing our work, putting realistic deadlines and timeframes on things, being really good at scoping work and figuring out what really matters and what doesn't, and getting rid of that stuff. Like, it's a bunch of those things. You have to practice that, of course, but I don't know. It's a long answer, so I don't know.
That's good. It's good. I mean, I think one thing,
we've been working at it for a long time. This did not just happen. We've been working at this for a long time. So,
Jonathan and I were talking before the interview started about what we selfishly wanted to get out of talking to you, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, you know, like, I'm looking for advice I can apply to either making the design sprint better or making my writing go better. And I think you've said a ton of stuff that to me has totally struck that chord. I'm like, man, yeah, like the authenticity to just do it faster so you can get through it while you're still being authentic. And I think there's a lot in what you just said that also really, to me, Jonathan, I don't know how you feel about it, but it sounds so much like the situation you're in right now, where the agency is young. You're the CEO of the agency. You're trying to figure out how to grow and like how to make that work. And that's got to be kind of like right on target for you. Are there any, well, Jason's AirPods just died, but are there any like Jason, if you had words of wisdom for somebody who's like, you're still shaping the form of your company in those early stages, and obviously you have a lot of stuff out there that is advice for people, but what's the hardest thing to keep true to all those elements? Like, what would you have done differently, or what are you so glad you did?
Yeah, you know, by the way, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I switched over. These things just died on me. So, I don't know if there's one thing, but I'll share a couple things that I think are really, really important. I think protecting your team's time and attention is like the most important thing you can actually do. If you want people to be able to do great work, they need uninterrupted stretches of time to do that work, and they need to go home and get away from work, and they need to sleep well at night. And at Basecamp, we don't have shared calendars. I cannot see what anyone else has. I can't see anyone else's calendar. No one can see mine. Yeah. So I cannot claim time on people's calendars. No one can take time from me. Everybody at Basecamp who works in product roles specifically has a full day to themselves. It's their day. It's their 8 hours to do what they need to do to get their job done. It's not they have 2 hours today because they're in meetings for 6 or whatever. So I think that giving people a full 8 hour day to themselves, figuring out how to do that, and how the company does not have to steal time away from people and burden them with all sorts of other things they probably don't need to do is really important. And the key thing there is to think about what really matters now versus what matters later. So the reason we don't have a lot of meetings at Basecamp, or hardly any meetings at all, is because meetings happen in real time, and the stuff that's discussed in those meetings rarely has anything to do with the moment it's being discussed. So instead, we write things up. We're very asynchronous in that way. We write up long, detailed documents, write up messages, and write up pitches, and share that stuff, so people can can read those things on their own time and their own schedule, versus being pulled away from their work to get into a room to discuss something right now that has nothing to do with right now. So it's about like structuring your day and structuring your time so people have it. And it's like, it's really as fundamental as that. I think if your day is filled up with other things, is filled up with other people's obligations, then you can't do your work. And that's why people are working longer hours. That's why things are taking longer. That's why that's why everyone's stressed out and rushing all the time. Like, it's that kind of basic fundamental stuff I think you have to get right first, so people actually have the time to do the work before you can solve any of the other problems. But I would also say that so much of what we all do every day does not matter at all, including like lengthy debates about this interface element or that interface element or this feature or that feature. In many cases, any of them will do probably just fine. In some cases, some are certainly great ideas and some are not. Like, that does exist. But for the most case, like, you know, most of the stuff is okay. So like, I just feel like make a call and move on. Something we learned from Bezos, Jeff Bezos, in his latest shareholder letter. I loved this idea. I don't know if you guys read it, but it's a really good.
Commit, right?
Disagree and commit, right?
So great.
Oh wait, I want to introduce.
Oops, you're dead, Jake.
Jake's video went away there for a sec.
Jake.
Oh, there he is. Oh no,
geez.
There he's back. You're back.
Yeah, I wanted to interrupt you guys to freeze Skype. No, is it still recording, Jason? Because it looks like
just checking. Jason, do you still have that window open, the Zencaster window?
Yeah, it says recording in progress, and it's still ticking away in the time and everything. Maybe it changed the mic settings. Hang on, let me change my mic settings because it doesn't look like I can't change them while it's in progress here.
Okay.
I wonder if we should stop it and start a new one, because I think it might have lost that last.
Don't worry, but that's what I have the backup for. We're good.
Okay.
I'll stop. I'll stop and start.
Oh, okay.
I have the backup, but it's just not as nice audio. So it actually would be
I will shut up. I'll shut up and stop messing with the floor.
It does look like It does look like my thing is not moving anymore.
Yeah, I'm just going to stop that. So you don't really need to do anything. I'm just going to click new recording and we gotta. You know what? Let's just use this audio. We're good, because that's gonna take a minute to take all your audio files. So just don't leave that page.
Okay. Yep.
We still have all the audio.
Jeff Bezos, disagree and commit.
It looked like, by the way, it reloaded on my screen, so I don't know if I still have those audio files or not. But
yeah, same here.
I have your audio file, Jason.
Okay.
1 hour, 4 minutes, and 45 seconds. I got it.
All right, you got it then. Okay. So disagree and commit. That was a topic that we'd use this method out, like this idea internally, but we never had language for it. And now that we have language for it, we use it all the time. And so it helps us shorten debates that don't need to go on very long, but could have and would have gone on very long. So we're not looking for a consensus. We're not looking for everyone to agree. Like we make our point, we all talk about it, and then on every single project, there's somebody called the point person, and the point person makes the final call. Whenever they're ready to make it, it's made, and that's it. And then we all whoever disagreed commits, and we go. So we're just trying to always have forward motion, and I think that's another thing that I would encourage people to get used to. It's not about speeding through things. You want to make sure things have been heard enough. But once arguments start being repeated, and other people start repeating those, it's like you can start to see where the circle or the loop closes, and then you're like, okay, that we need to make a call. So I think it's just developing those kinds of skills are some things. So I can never answer the question with like, what's the one thing I'd suggest? But I do think respecting time and attention first and foremost is critical, because without that, it's very hard to get any meaningful work done. And then it's about like really figuring out what is meaningful work and what is not worth doing. What is, that is a lot harder to figure out than what's worth doing. What's not worth doing is really hard. So kind of work on those skills, and how do you do that? That's a whole nother podcast. But and then the other thing I would just finally say is like get very good at saying no to things. Like really build up your tolerance to being okay to say no to stuff, and work on all that kind of stuff. And keep the team as small as you possibly can for as long as you possibly can. We basically we're 56 people now. We have a hiring freeze, not because we can't afford to hire people. We could hire 100 people, whatever we wanted to hire, but we don't want to hire anyone else. And we're basically saying everything we want to be able to do, we should be able to do with who we have. And if we can't do it with who we have, then we either don't do it, or we do something else, or we wait until we can do it. Like that's it. That's just those are the concerns we put on ourselves, and all that kind of stuff. I think is really important.
How many people were you when? So you guys started in '99. Is that right?
99. Getting real in 2006, I think. Yeah.
2006 is right.
Like that. Yeah, we were, I don't know, 12. I don't even know.
12-ish. Okay, and then rework is 2010.
Yep, we were probably I don't know, probably in 30s. Maybe 30 people, 20s, 30s, something like that.
Okay.
We tend to hire a few people a year, max, like 2 or 3. There have been some moments when we've hired 5 or 6 because we hired a lot of people in customer service. So we've had a few years where there's been but mostly like we hire 2 or 3 people a year, something like that. Yeah, that's it. And we just, and then we work with what we have, and we force ourselves to make better decisions because we don't have a lot of extra room not to make good decisions.
It's so interesting to me that one of the first things you said was make sure people have time to work, that you're not interrupting them. Because if that is your first principle, that forces you to say no. That forces you to be really careful about who you've got and what things you're taking on and what kinds of culture you allow in terms of meetings or discussions. You can't allow them if you're going to give people time, which is great.
I mean, really, and what it really actually, there's probably a step before that, which is 8-hour days, 40-hour weeks. That's really step one for us. And everything we do has to be able to be done in that amount of time. And therefore, you keep it actually makes a lot of other decisions very easy. Because then you're like, should we sit in a meeting for 3 hours? No, because we only have 8 hours today, and that's 3 of them gone. And we only have 40 hours this week. And so that's 10% gone, roughly. Like that doesn't seem like it's valuable enough. How else can we make these decisions? That kind of stuff. And you start to think like we don't have that much time. And in the summers, we only work 32-hour weeks. May through September, we do 32-hour weeks. So that even compresses our time even more, which allows us to practice being more and more efficient with our time, and really, really get down to like what matters and what doesn't. And that can be a struggle sometimes, but it's a good struggle. And then it makes, when we get back to 40, it's like, oh my God, we have all this extra time. And most people are like 40, that's not anywhere near enough time, but it is plenty of time. And the way I think of it, by the way, an 8-hour day is like a flight from Chicago to London is 8 hours. And if you've ever been on a flight from Chicago to London, or I guess wherever else, basically an 8-hour transcontinental flight, like it's long. And you look at your clock or your watch or whatever, and you're like, oh my God, there's still 4 hours left. And then you look at it again, like there's still 2.5 hours left. But at work, people are like, it's 5. And it's like, oh my God, it's 5 already? Where'd the day go? Like no one feels like that on an airplane. And it's because on an airplane, like there's no distractions. And it turns out 8 hours is a lot of time to do a lot of stuff when no one's bothering you. So that's where we start from. That 8 hours is plenty of time. It's plenty of time. And I think it'd be interesting actually for, for people to just like to experiment with that, to go get a flight that's 8 hours and go sit on it and do nothing and see how long that feels. Cause that's your work day. And you'll realize that actually days are pretty long. It's a lot of time here. God, I wish I had this kind of time. And you're like, you do have this kind of time. Every day you have this kind of time. Yeah. You just don't feel it the same way.
Well, it's an interesting idea that as a team, you could start with that principle that we are going to have full work days and start with that lens, that so many other things might fall into place because you just wouldn't take on the kind of complexity. You wouldn't wait forever to ship things you can get things done so much more quickly when you have dedicated time and you can get your head in it and you're not constantly bouncing out and whiplashing between different things.
Definitely.
And it's such a counterintuitive first principle to think it's about the quality of your day. If you start there with the quality of the day, the people who you work with and yourself, good things will flow from that.
I think so. And you can even start, by the way, at the quality of an hour. That's really kind of a good unit. So like 60 minutes, 60 times 1 is what we're after, not 15 times 15, or sorry, not 15 plus 15 plus 15 plus 15.
Yeah.
That's still 60 minutes, but it's not the same as 60 minutes. You know what I mean? So we're really looking at like kind of the quality of an hour first, and then stacking 8 of those on top of each other, giving that to every person, then stacking 5 of those days in a row every week. And turns out you can get a whole lot of stuff done. Actually, a whole lot of stuff done when you're flying to London every day, basically.
Excellent. And I think that's a great way to end the podcast, if that's all right with you guys. I think it was an amazing conversation. Sure. We got to an hour and 12 minutes. And yeah, I think really, really great topics, really interesting conversation. All right, guys. Well,
cool.
That was really cool. That was really, really amazing that you took the time to do that, Jason. Really appreciate it.
Well, same. I feel the same way. Thanks for making this happen.
No, thank you for being so generous with your time. That was totally awesome. That was a dream come true.
Yeah, it's very kind. Likewise, I'm glad we were able to do this. And if you ever want to do it again, let me know.
Yeah, I mean, we'll
take you up on that. Careful what you promise.
Tomorrow. Let's do the re-recording of it. Have a good one, Jason. Cool. Bye, Jason.
Yeah, see you guys. Take care.
See ya.